Good morning, leaders, and welcome back to the classroom. Up to this point, we have talked about following, relevance, our presence, leading inside and outside of the box, and connecting with every follower to include those who don't measure up. So I hope you're ready for another leadership discussion here at Manhood University. Now, I've learned that we have a fair amount of women in the classroom during our leadership sessions. So I will simply say this. While Man U is all about the fellas, we need good leadership everywhere. So I will never turn anyone away who's willing to keep adding to their leadership toolbox. Now, if you're ready, let's jump right in. I have a biblical figure who represents this week's lesson, but not in the way you think. Today, I want to use King Solomon's son, Rehoboam, whose name I'm sure I've butchered, who took the throne right after his father. Now, in 2 Chronicles chapter 10, we find him about to be made king, and the people are wanting to kind of renegotiate terms. Now, before you get your back up about that, consider that with the help of the people, and I do use the word help liberally, Solomon built several things. Just some of the projects that history records as being completed on King Solomon's orders were the temple, his personal palace, the hall of pillars, the hall of justice, several fleets of ships and their harbors, and stables for his thousands of horses. So when the people approached his son to renegotiate, their actions by today's standards would be considered a simple contract renegotiation with very generous terms, actually, for the king. All they said to him was, "Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you." They were essentially saying, "We built a lot of stuff for your dad. Could we please get a break?" Now, the young king knew this was his first big test, so he told the people to wait 3 days for his answer. And then he asked the older, wiser advisors for their opinion, and they told him that what the people were asking for was more than acceptable, and it would be good for the kingdom. Side note there, if you're going to ask for my advice or the advice of any elder, don't do it as a courtesy. You see, Rehoboam asked his friends, young men with no experience in leadership, what he should do as well. And they responded exactly how you would expect a group of boys to respond when they've just found out that their friend now has a new powerful position. You see, the follower who doesn't want to be developed allows themselves to be informed about leadership based entirely on opinions, not experience. When we talked about followership as the foundation of leadership, we mentioned the leaders who rule with what looks like an iron fist. Now, these young men saw the things that King Solomon was able to do, but being just the friends of the king's son, they didn't really understand the circumstances surrounding King Solomon's decisions. So their answer to him was to do what a lot of people who were put in charge before they're ready do. And that was attempt to project a stronger image in order to keep from looking weak. They essentially advised him to portray himself as an even harsher ruler than his father. And then he learned a concept that at that point, his follower friends would have never chosen to educate themselves about. And that's called the consent of the governed. That phrase is not going to come up in the daily life of a person who's not growing themselves to lead one day. But a simple study of human history can show you object lessons, if not clear definitions of this concept. Just about every institution, from our nation to your small business, is governed by some form of a social contract. Now, the topic of social contract, that's one that we can study more in depth another time. But for today, we need to peel back the onion just a little to get to the layer that's called consent of the governed. Understand that right now, even though you need your job, you agree to trade in your right to do what you want with your time, with your day, in exchange for a salary and benefits. Now, that may come with you being talked to in a way that's not always pleasing to the ear, or having to put up with company policies that you find overbearing or even unnecessary. Make no mistake about it, though, there's a breaking point you can reach with the craziness on your job where you will walk out. Listen, regardless of the loss of status, pay, and benefits. And now you're withdrawn your consent to be governed by those rules. Got it? Don't believe me? The founding fathers put up with a lot from the king, but they finally said one day, to hell with this. We may get hung for it, but better to die without the king's protection than to live under these unfair conditions. Consent of the governed only works with Well, consent. And that comes when those under you see a benefit to giving some things up in favor of your leadership. So, leader, what do your followers get out of this relationship? What are you getting out of it? What are your expectations? Pop quiz, what are their expectations? You can reach a point where you give the orders and there's no one around to follow them. You know what a leader with no followers is? A guy taking a walk. Now, if you're willing, we can look at a few ways that a leader can find themselves left out to dry, not by their subordinates, but by their own actions, and ensure that when you're in the seat, you skip this step altogether. Now, look, the first way we lose followers is when we don't set the right example. I know you're tired of hearing this from me, but it's the most common way that leaders lose credibility, and lost credibility translates to lost followers. The do as I say, not as I do attitude comes up a lot in this category. If there's a process that's supposed to be followed by all employees and you really disagree with it, you may have even found a better way. And once word gets around that you take the shortcut or the easier route, you look like the maverick. Now, that may sound great for you, but what happens when you have a process that you want executed a certain way? Subordinates want to see that leaders are held to the same standards they are. Remember that followers have to buy in. Look at it like this. The boss is the dictator. The leader is the elected official. You can't choose your boss, but you willingly follow a leader. Yeah, that's going to trip up some of you because I know you ended up as the boss with no clear indication that your subordinates either supported or condemned the decision. But you can choose to be a leader simply by building a reputation for being someone worth following. And that starts with applying the leadership principles that you've been learning. This can't be fabricated. A PR campaign can't make this happen for you. It's earned. One conversation, one relationship, one problem solved, one life influenced at a time. Now, that second way we lose followers comes right on the heels of the very steps you took to mitigate the first pitfall. And that's when we believe our own hype. This manifests itself as seeing ourselves as someone that people should want to follow. And maybe that's legitimate, at least in one sense. You could be an inspirational mentor and leader whose proteges have gone on to do amazing things, and they sing your praises whenever asked. But when you take the attitude that people should be thankful that you're even willing to work with them, or here's my favorite. Do you know who I am? That one just irks me. Listen, one of the worst forms of arrogance that comes just before a leader is about to cede the high ground is that of assumed recognition. But when the hype grows bigger than the man, and that's almost always due to him buying into the hype himself, the next step is a downfall. Once isolated from the reality checks of not being the most important person in the room, you cut yourself off from sources of growth. Prepare to be abandoned when a leader emerges who's still willing to be developed. Now, that third way a leader gets left alone is by overdoing it. If you're in charge, be in charge. Leaders, beyond the formal introduction, when you have to keep saying, I'm the president of, director of, the principal of, the pastor of, the chairman of, the special assistant to, the chief of, whatever it is, that lets me know that you're not in charge. You have a title, but you are fighting for relevance. People in charge don't need to continually introduce themselves. The atmosphere adjusts to them. If you're not sure of your footing, get some wisdom. But when you communicate to your subordinates that this is, in fact, your first rodeo, you lose them. And this is what we see from King Solomon's son. He has no clue how his father was able to get 12 tribes all working together to build and do the things they have. So he panics and asserts the power of his position with little wisdom. So from early in the lesson, we said his friends convinced him to run from the wisdom of the elders who provided good counsel. Now, weren't we told before that in the multitude of counsel, there's safety? But anyways, in trying to make himself out to be a harsher leader than his father, well, let's just look at the rest of the story here. After those 3 days passed, the NIV quotes his answer as this: My father made your yoke heavy, I'll make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips, I'll scourge you with scorpions. And the people's response was one that he was not ready for. The text puts it this way: What share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's son? To your tents, Israel. Look after your own house, David. He wound up losing 10 out of the 12 tribes instantly. The elders had experience. The young men had opinions. The king was left with 17% of his father's kingdom, all because he turned to an opinionated man instead of one with experience. Can you imagine blowing 83% of your inheritance all because you listened to the people who fluffed your ego instead of the leaders who've been where you've not? If your father left you as much as Solomon left his son, why on earth would you ask people who've never dealt with that much money or property or personnel what to do with it all? But that's what we do oftentimes, isn't it? How many times, leaders, do we reject good mentorship because it doesn't align with popular culture or make us look good to our peers? What that young king failed to realize until it was too late was that the day his father died, those men were no longer his peers. The day is coming, young leader, when the people you sit around with today complaining about leaders and policies that you only have opinions about, that day is coming when you'll be offered a perspective that they don't have. But you have to be willing to get it. Otherwise, you will take advice from people who've not been where you're going and realize too late to save your kingdom, that a man with experience is never beholden to a man with an opinion. Well, leaders, this was fun. We got into a couple deep concepts today, and I hope to see you all back here next time as we continue our lessons on leadership. God bless you.